In October of 1988, the city of Stockton, California, was a place of everyday rhythms, families gathering at local pizza shops, teens hanging out after school near the Delta waterways, and parents commuting to downtown jobs. It was a typical Central Valley community, warm, familiar, and deeply rooted in routine. But for one family, everything changed in a matter of hours. On the morning of October 18, 1988, Gayle Marie Marks, an 18-year-old from Stockton, vanished without a trace. Her case would soon become one of the area's most haunting, unsolved disappearances, a mystery that still lingers more than 3 decades later. For more videos like this, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Born on November 30th, 1969, Gayle Marie Marks was the daughter of a hard-working family who lived in Stockton, located in San Joaquin County, California. Friends and family described her as bright, friendly, and thoughtful. She was known for her kindness and her ability to make others feel seen, traits that came naturally to her, even at a young age. Gayle had a close relationship with her mother, who worked for the San Joaquin County Mental Health Department. The two often spent time together, and even on ordinary workdays. Gayle would accompany her mother to the office before running her own errands around town. At 18, Gayle stood about 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed around 110 pounds. She had blonde, medium-length permed hair and blue eyes, features that gave her a youthful, approachable look. When she disappeared, she was wearing a black long-sleeve shirt, black skirt, brown high-top shoes, a brown scarf tied around her waist, and a black leather necklace with small silver spheres. The late 1980s in Stockton were a transitional period. The community was growing rapidly, but with that came challenges, unemployment, shift in demographics, and rising crime rates. Even so, Stockton wasn't known for disappearances like Gayle's. Violent crime was a concern. But the idea of a young woman vanishing in broad daylight was almost unimaginable. Back then, communication was different. There were no cell phones, no instant alerts, and no social media posts that could go viral within minutes. If someone didn't come home, families relied on landline calls, word of mouth, and police reports that could take hours or even days to gain traction. When Gayle vanished, the response reflected the limits of that era. The urgency that modern cases receive Amber Alerts, digital bulletins, automatic media attention didn't exist. Instead, her disappearance began quietly, as a missing persons report filed by a worried mother after her daughter didn't return from a day of errands. October 18, 1988 began like any other day. Gayle accompanied her mother to work at the mental health department. Her mother later recalled that Gayle seemed perfectly normal, cheerful, calm, and planning to handle a few things before her evening shift at her job as a waitress at Rick's New York-style pizza. After leaving her mother's workplace, Gayle headed toward the Department of Motor Vehicles DMV office on Park Street in Stockton. She had recently applied for her driver's license and was expecting it soon. Witnesses later confirmed that Gayle did, in fact, arrive at the DMV that morning, a detail supported by the fact that her new license was mailed to her afterward. After completing her errand, Gayle attempted to call her mother at work. The message she left was short and casual, indicating nothing unusual. She didn't sound upset or frightened. There was no sense of distress in her voice. At some point after that phone call, Gayle planned to stop by a friend's house before her shift at 5 p.m. However, that friend was away on jury duty. The meeting never happened. That evening, when Gayle didn't show up for work and later didn't return home, her family knew something was wrong. Gayle was responsible and dependable. She never missed work without notice, and she certainly wouldn't have vanished voluntarily. The initial concern quickly turned to panic. Her mother tried calling Gayle's friends, her workplace, and anyone who might have seen her that afternoon. There was no trace of her. Her purse, personal belongings, and paycheck were left behind. Stockton police were notified that night, and a missing person report was filed. But as with many cases involving young adults, early responses were cautious. because Gayle was legally an adult. Some initial theories suggested she might have left voluntarily, a possibility that, to her family, was unthinkable. As the first 24 hours passed, there were no signs of Gayle or clues to her whereabouts. No one reported seeing her after her trip to the DMV. Her disappearance didn't make immediate headlines, but among friends and family, the search began in earnest. Flyers went up across Stockton, gas stations, grocery stores, and schools. Calls were made to nearby hospitals and jails, but no one had seen her. By the end of the week, it was clear that Gayle hadn't simply run away. She hadn't accessed her bank account, contacted anyone she knew, or returned for any of her possessions. Her mother later said she couldn't believe how quickly her daughter seemed to vanish, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. Over the following months, Stockton police conducted interviews and followed leads. They canvassed the area around the DMV and her mother's workplace, but no solid evidence emerged. The late 1980s in Northern California would soon become notorious for a series of violent crimes and disappearances linked to several serial offenders operating in the region. In later years, investigators would look back at Gayle's case with the grim awareness that she might have crossed paths with one of them. But in those first few months, there were only questions and silence. For Gayle's family, that silence was unbearable. Every ring of the phone brought a flicker of hope, every unknown number a momentary belief that it might be her. But the calls were never from Gayle. In almost every long-term disappearance, speculation inevitably arises. Gayle's case was no exception. Some suggested she might have been abducted by someone she knew. Others believed it could have been a stranger. At the time, a few unsolved abductions and murders of young women in Northern California shared eerie similarities with Gayle's disappearance. These crimes had occurred within roughly the same period, late 1980s through the early 1990s across San Joaquin, Calaveras, and surrounding counties. While investigators didn't immediately connect the cases, they couldn't ignore the pattern of missing or murdered women whose last known locations were near Stockton or Lodi. For the next decade, Gayle's case remained cold. Detectives revisited it periodically, re-interviewing witnesses and checking for DNA matches as forensic technology advanced. Her name continued to appear on state and national databases, including the California Department of Justice's Missing Persons Unit, the Doe Network, and later the Charlie Project, where the details of her case were carefully preserved to ensure she would not be forgotten. Then, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, a shocking development would bring Gayle's case back to light. In 1999, California law enforcement arrested two men, Wesley Howard Sherman Jr. and Lauren Joseph Herzog, both from the small town of Linden, just 20 miles east of Stockton. The pair would later become known as the Speed Freak Killers, a nickname given due to their methamphetamine use and a series of brutal killings stretching across San Joaquin and Calaveras counties. Sherman and Herzog were suspected of abducting and killing multiple young women throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Their crimes involved abductions from public areas, sometimes broad daylight, and victims who seemingly vanished into thin air, much like Gayle. After their arrest, investigators across Northern California began re-examining cold cases that matched the killer's timeline and victim profile. Gayle Marie Marks was one of those names. Her age, location, and date of disappearance aligned disturbingly well with the period when Sherman and Herzog were active. Both men were known to cruise highways and towns in the Stockton-Linden area looking for potential victims. In 2012, more than 2 decades after Gayle's disappearance, Sherman, then on death row, began cooperating with investigators. He led authorities to several burial sites, including wells and rural properties where human remains were discovered. Some were later identified as women who had been missing for years. This discovery reignited speculation that Gayle could be among the yet unidentified victims found in those sites. However, despite numerous DNA comparisons, no match to Gayle has ever been confirmed. Still, investigators have never ruled out a connection. The Stockton Police Department has stated that her case remains open and under review for any new evidence that could emerge from the speed-free killer's investigation. By the 2010s, Gayle's case had been officially reclassified as a possible homicide. While she was still listed as a missing person, police acknowledged that foul play was almost certain. Detectives noted that she had no reason to vanish voluntarily, and after more than 30 years without contact, the likelihood of survival was virtually non-existent. Her family has never stopped hoping for answers, not necessarily for a miracle, but for closure. Throughout the years, Gayle's mother has remained steadfast in her search for truth. She has spoken to journalists, worked with missing person advocacy organizations, and continued to update Gayle's case profile to keep her story alive. Each anniversary of her disappearance is a reminder not just of the tragedy, but of the enduring love that drives families of the missing to keep fighting long after the headlines fade. For the Stockton community, Gayle's case stands as a painful symbol of loss and unanswered questions. Advances in forensic genealogy have transformed the landscape of missing person investigations by combining traditional DNA profiles with genealogical databases. Law enforcement agencies can sometimes identify victims or perpetrators decades after a crime. In 2018, the same technique that led to the arrest of the Golden State Killer inspired smaller jurisdictions to re-examine their own cases. Stockton detectives reviewed which of their cold cases, including Gayle's, might be eligible for such testing. Because her family's reference DNA is on file, investigators could potentially use familial DNA matching if any related profile appears in a genealogical database of unidentified remains. While no public disclosure has confirmed active genealogical testing in Gayle's case, her inclusion in NamUs in the state's missing and unidentified persons DNA database program ensures that the opportunity remains open. The internet became a new lifeline for families of the missing. Websites like the Charlie Project and the Do Network emerged in the early 2000s, meticulously documenting each unsolved disappearance with photographs, timelines, and verified details. These online archives prevented cases like Gayle's from vanishing into obscurity. Gayle's profile on these platforms presents a concise but powerful record. Her appearance, clothing, and final known movements, ensuring that anyone, anywhere, can see her face and story. Her mother, through advocates, also authorized age-progressed images produced by forensic artists from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to visualize what Gayle might look like today. Occasionally, local media in the Central Valley revisits her case, often during anniversaries of the Speed Freak Killer's investigation. Each article or televised segment renews community awareness, prompting new tips even if many lead nowhere. Still, detectives emphasize that a single credible call could change everything. Families of the missing endure a unique kind of grief known as ambiguous loss. Without physical proof of death or survival, closure becomes impossible. Gayle's mother has spoken privately to support groups for relatives of long-term missing persons, describing the emotional toll of waiting for answers that may never come. When asked what she would say if she could speak to her daughter now, Gayle's mother once answered softly, "I'd tell her that we never stopped looking, not for a single day." That statement captures the spirit of countless families bound by uncertainty, people who refuse to let silence define the end of a loved one's story. The Stockton Police Department urges anyone with information about Gayle Marie Marks' disappearance to come forward. Even details that seem minor, an unfamiliar car near the DMV that day, a remembered conversation, a forgotten acquaintance, could finally bring clarity. Agency, Stockton Police Department. Case number 8844123. Contact 209-93-78377. Gayle was only 18 years old, poised between adolescence and adulthood, with plans for work, friends, and the simple freedoms that come from earning a first driver's license. Her story remains unfinished, but her memory lives on in every record preserved, every article written, and every quiet vigil kept by those who knew her. In telling and retelling her story, communities affirm that she still matters, not as a statistic or an unsolved file, but as a daughter, friend, and young woman whose life was cut short in mystery. What true crime case has stuck with you or kept you up at night? Let us know in the comments. Your suggestion might be featured in an upcoming episode.